Once upon a time, around 1930-31 or so, a professor at Oxford University sat down to grade some examination papers. On one of the sheets, on a whim, he wrote 10 simple words. He could not have dreamt that those innocent words would eventually spawn an international, multi-billion-dollar industry. The professor, of course, was John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. And those 10 words formed one of the most famous opening lines in all of English literature. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. Now, you found yourselves outside a troll's cave at the second part of an ongoing series of discussions, well, monologues actually, about the Hobbit trilogy of movies. Part 1 is linked above and below. We will begin with a digression regarding the word trilogy. The word is wrongly applied to The Lord of the Rings, which is, was, and always will be a single novel or movie published in 3 parts. It is one. The Hobbit is a different situation entirely. First, it's only one book. Yes, it is similarly spread over 3 movies, but with so much padding as to make them separate entities. Or as Bilbo would say, stretched, like butter spread over too much bread. We'll again be viewing the theatrical versions because of the same reasons stated previously. So let's go, and don't forget your pocket handkerchief. When last we saw Bilbo, Gandalf, and the dwarves, they had just escaped from the trolls, found a treasure trove at a cave, and got their hands on some fine ancient elvish swords that Thorin didn't want to have anything to do with.
Elvish make, which means it will glow blue when orcs or goblins are nearby.
Of course, the movie continues with a scene nowhere near the book. The non-existent Radagast and his amazing magic rabbits. Really, do we have to?
It's Radagast the Bron.
Now, the book takes us for a 2-page stroll across the countryside, ending up at the Valley of Rivendell. The movie takes us Iluvatar knows where. If Jackson really wanted to make this movie more epic, he could have started by not introducing this clown. Anyway, the next 10 minutes of the movie simply do not exist. And I'm not going to waste more time on it than I have to. And there's no mention of spiders.
They came from Dol Guldur.
But we will give you a brief history of Dol Guldur. In the year 2460, Sauron occupied Dol Guldur. In 2850, Gandalf enters it and verifies that the necromancer is indeed Sauron. Gandalf finds Thrain there and is given the key, but Thrain dies. 2851, the White Council meets. Gandalf urges an attack on Dol Guldur, but Saruman overrules him. 2941, present day. Well, that is the events of The Hobbit. The White Council meets and finally agrees to attack Dol Guldur. Sauron abandons the fortress and heads to Mordor. 2951, Sauron declares himself openly and sends 3 Nazgul to occupy Dol Guldur. In 2953 is the last meeting of the White Council. Saruman pretends that he has discovered the One Ring has passed down the Anduin to the sea. He withdraws to Isengard and fortifies it. And no one is suspicious?
The Valley of Imladris. In the common tongue, it's known by another name.
The company arrives at Rivendell.
Rivendell.
Here lies the last homely house east of the sea.
Now, in the early 30s, in Britain especially, homely did not mean ugly. It meant homey, or home-like, safe and comfortable.
You have no enemies here, Thorin Oakenshield. The only ill will to be found in this valley is that which you bring yourself.
The initial welcome was far different in the book. Now, this requires a digression on the nature of the elves. So, let's head back to the bar. This is an area where it is most important to remember the basic premise that The Hobbit is a children's story. Now, the elves in the book are children's fairy tale elves, not the ancient and noble race they become in The Lord of the Rings. Even Tolkien is conflicted. A lot happened in his universe building between 1937 and 1954. So we end up with at least 3 interpretations of what elves are. Tolkien's, well, let's call them proto-elves from this book. Tolkien's mature elves from The Lord of the Rings, and Jackson's version from the movies. Now, he seems to have imbued them with slightly more nobility and a closer relationship with the ancient lore. But at the same time, he made them more warrior-like and a little more arrogant. And he tells us next to nothing about their background. Now, there are also the wood elves from the 1977 Rankin Bass animated version, which look more like a cross between fairies and some other nondescript humanoid. And keep in mind, no self-respecting elf in The Lord of the Rings would be caught dead singing that silly tra-la-la-lalance. The book version introduces Elrond better than Jackson did, and explains why, in the animated version anyway, he looks human rather than like the wood elves.
The master of the house was an elf friend, one of those people whose fathers came into the strange stories before the beginning of history, the wars of the evil goblins, and the elves and the first men in the north. In those days of our tale, there were still some people who had both elves and heroes of the north for ancestors, and Elrond, the master of the house, was their chief. He was as noble and as fair in face as an elf lord, as strong as a warrior, as wise as a wizard, as venerable as a king of dwarves, and as kind as summer.
In the actual Tolkien universe, of course, elves have always looked like humans, except for the ears. Well, drink up, let's go. The company came across the elves just outside Rivendell and were cordially invited to supper. There was some good-natured teasing by the elves, mainly about the dwarves' beards and Bilbo's girth. The confrontation between Thorin and Elrond is only in Jackson's mind.
Welcome, Thorin, son of Thrain.
I do not believe we have met.
The makeup crew deserves recognition here. Now, this movie is 10 years after The Lord of the Rings, and yet Hugo Weaving looks at least 20 years younger. Well, they stayed for 2 weeks, but all we know about it is the identifying of the swords and the reading of the runes. Now, at least those bits were accurate. But there's no mention of green food or anything else that may have happened.
This is Oakrist, the Goblin Cleaver.
A famous blade, forged by the high elves of the west.
His Glamdring.
The foe hammer, sword of the king of Gondolin.
Kirth Ithil. Moon runes. Of course.
runes can only be read by the light of a moon of the same shape and season as the day on which they were written. These runes were written on a midsummer's eve by the light of a crescent moon nearly 200 years ago. Fate is with you, Thorin Oakenshield. The same moon shines upon us tonight. Stand by the grey stone when the thrush knocks. The setting sun with the last light of Durin's day will shine upon the keyhole.
Durin's Day.
It is the start of the dwarves' new year, when the last moon of autumn and the first sun open the sky together.
This is ill news. Summer is passing. Durin's
Another
Day.
example of the Jacksonian adaptation method of randomly reassigning lines of dialogue to just about anyone who happens to be there, rather than the person who actually said them.
You are not the only guardian to stand watch over Middle-earth.
An ominous, yet meaningless, statement by Elrond.
Chosdain, Torgoz, Zunranimid.
And needless to say, this entire orc sequence is movie over. And surprise, surprise, Azog is alive, and with a Luke Skywalker hand. But it looks like Jackson has come around and accepted that orcs are wolves. Now things get weird. The meeting of the White Council that this is supposed to represent actually took place some 90 years prior to the time of the Hobbit. So mentions of smog are nonsense at best.
Dwarvish company,
And
however,
at that time,
troubles
the
me
council had
deeply.
already
I'm
known
not
for
convinced
10
now.
years that the necromancer was indeed Sauron.
I do not feel
So
like
none
no,
of Saruman's
such a
objections
question.
made any sense at
If you
all.
come to me, I might-
And the interactions between Gandalf and Galadriel never happened at any time or any place. Never. Period. Movie only, so you can ignore it if you like.
Be on your guard.
But it does give the feeling of closing one chapter and moving on to the next,
You know these
which is exactly what we're doing. We start Chapter 4 with another New Zealand Tourism Board commercial, rather than the somewhat unpleasant weather forecast the book presents, before agreeing on the severe thunderstorm and the stone giants duking it out. The movie, though, extends and embellishes this. They did manage to find a dry cave, slightly differently than in the book,
Looks safe enough.
but close
Search
enough.
to the back. Caves in the mountain are seldom unoccupied.
And there were no orcs on their trail.
Stakun. Orkir gehir harnish.
Bilbo did not try to sneak out and go home. He was awakened by the sound of the rear wall of the cave cracking open, and was startled to see their ponies disappearing into the crack. He screamed, waking the dwarves, but too late. They were all taken captive by goblins. Now may be the time to deal with the oft-asked questions, what are goblins? And how do they differ from orcs? Well, you can think of goblins and orcs as two different literary subspecies of the same creature. They differ by about 16 or 17 years. Remember, once again, The Hobbit is a children's story. Children were quite familiar with goblins from other fairy tales. The Brothers Grimm, Charles Perrault, aka Mother Goose, all that. Later, in the adult story, goblins just sounded a bit childish, and it was. So Tolkien changed the name to orcs. Simple. Or would be, if Peter Jackson hadn't decided to introduce orcs into the story and treat the two groups differently. You'll notice the goblins are portrayed here much more cartoony and closer to how they were shown in the book. Now, back to the cave. Oh, by the way, the next half hour of screen time presents a number of issues. There's a half chapter of the book, 7 pages, in the Goblin's Cave in one continuous narrative. The movie cuts this into 3 scenes, totaling 11 minutes. Then there's a full chapter of 21 pages of Bilbo and Gollum. The film spends 17 minutes on this, again cutting into 3 separate scenes, intertwined with the Goblin Cave scenes. Now, personally, I prefer linearity. I'd like to see the Goblin scenes resolved before moving on to Gollum, and then watch that beginning to end. But movies like to jump around. Directors seem to think that holds the audience's attention better. I disagree. I think it's distracting. You keep forgetting what happened before and lose track of what's going on. And there's the added difficulty of YouTube's Content ID system, colloquially known as the copyright bomb. Now, the clips shown need to be limited in length and quantity. But to really follow what's going on, the clips usually need to be maybe 15 or 16 seconds long. And if you do that, Warner Brothers sends the copyright cops after you. And believe me, you don't want to mess with this guy. So the clips get hacked to shreds and or distorted in some way. But you guys know the scene, so you probably can follow along anyway. With all that in mind, of the next 28 minutes of screen time, you may get 5 minutes here. Let's see what we can do.
Well, well, well. Look who it is. Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, king under the mountain. Oh, but I'm forgetting you don't have a mountain. And you're not a king. You? Nobody, really.
If you had been paying attention a while back, you would have seen Bilbo and a goblin fall hundreds of feet off a cliff. Now, there are just over 8 billion people on Earth, and every one of them, except Peter Jackson and company, realize those two would have been turned into 2 gooey piles of hamburger on the floor of that cave. Plus, Bilbo didn't get separated from the dwarves until the end of the goblin sequence, not in the middle of it. He did not fall any distance, only from Dory's shoulders onto the floor, and there was no goblin, so Gollum was denied his lunch. But Sting's light extinguishing as the goblin died is a nice artistic touch. It gets the point across without being gross. Bilbo and Gollum came face to face, and after much hissing and my precious-ing, they began the famous riddle game.
So,
Now, I know this is sacrilege to many, but I find this excruciatingly boring. Start skimming over it. If you want it, go read it yourself. I will, however, allow that Andy Serkis's face deserves about a dozen Oscars for this scene.
Well, that is...
In the end, Bilbo wins by basically cheating. Gollum has an anxiety attack because he can't find the precious. Now, in the book, he had to take his boat back to his island to find that it was missing. And the chase through the tunnels begins. And the buttons don't come off until the very end, as he squeezes out of the cave. Bilbo falls and the ring flies up and lands on his finger, exactly like Frodo with the prancing pony, except mirror-imaged. Meanwhile, Gandalf makes another in a series of Deus Ex Machina appearances, although he was there all along in the book. The battle continues to rage. A one-paragraph battle goes on for almost 5 minutes.
Escape me.
Gandalf goes mano a mano with the Great Goblin and slashes him along the stomach.
That'll do it.
The dwarves jump on a Disney World Indiana Jones ride to the bottom of the cave. Bilbo, now invisible, sees the dwarves run past towards an exit. He is about to dispatch Gollum when the creature flashes those baby blues and awakens Bilbo's pity, leading to seemingly endless philosophizing by Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings. Does Bilbo make it out? Is he reunited with the dwarves? Don't miss the next exciting episode for the answers to these and other questions.